Will you do a stream highlight for recommended tier 8 ships for ranked? Recommended tier 8 ships for ranked. Maybe I'll do a really lazy one. Let's see, what do we have? Tier 8. We can start here. Tallinn, highly recommended. Tallinn is a monster. Like in terms of cruiser power, this thing has great concealment, great armor. It's got an icebreaker and it's got a Eugen's turtleback, 40 millimeters. It's got amazing AP, better pen than Baltimore, insane shell velocity, and it can stealth radar. So this thing is good against basically everything. It also has so much range that if you're forced to sit in the back at low HP and snipe, you can still do a lot of damage. So Tallinn, in terms of cruisers, is an insane pick. It's so good. Bagration is kind of like a tanky Atago. An AP Atago would be better. If you have to use all 3 turrets, you give a ton of broadside, but if you don't, this thing has an absurd amount of survivability. Once again, Soviet icebreaker, good close range torpedoes, and just insane AP. Carriers, well, all carriers are great. I don't doubt I have to get into those, but carriers will always be insane because it's the most overpowered class, so I'm kind of going to skip over them. Shikoku and Lexington, I mean, they got Kaga. Enterprise is obviously going to be the top pick because that thing is horrendously broken, but carriers in general are busted. To all kingdom come. Z35, no. No. No, Z35, absolutely not. The ship is very, very questionable. At best, it's decent against other DDs, but if you want to fight other DDs, play Loyang or something, if you want to hide red. Mines is great. Mines is a monster. It doesn't have Tallinn's utility against DDs, but it makes up for it for having an absolutely filthy HE and AP DPM. Especially the AP DPM is monstrous. If you have Guntalutians, it's beastly. It gets the icebreaker, but it doesn't get Eugen's amazing. Oh, actually, never mind. This one gets to 40 millimeters as well. Nice. Okay, never mind. Mines is so insanely good in every way. Not that it would have mattered at tier 8, there's no 457 to think about or to care about. Champagne, no. Champagne is, even in randoms, it's just a backline support. That's the same role it would fulfill in randoms. If you bring a Champagne to ranked, you're not actually trying to win the game, you're trying to save your star. And taking a ship where your goal from the get-go is to save a star is really, really stupid. The reason why it's a save a star battleships is because if you have to push in, any other battleship can overmatch you, you're easily HE penetratable, you have no real health pool or armor, and even the broadside can be easily punched through. So no. If you bring a Champagne, you're not even trying to win. You're just playing to save your star, which is a really stupid approach to take to the battle to begin with. Akizuki is fantastic. Akizuki, of course, has these 100mm guns, which have insane penetration. They got 30mm base. You build IFHE and you can farm every American battleship and all French ones and pin a majority of all the ships that you fight. Akizuki is really, really good. Always been really good. Akizuki's weakness is really been radars and carriers in general, because it's quite clumsy and it's a fairly large destroyer as well. So I expect to see a fair bit of DDs though, which means that if you can support another DD who's doing the scouting, then Akizuki's firepower will be very powerful indeed. Kagero, see, the problem is the carriers and the radar. Kagero's great gimmick, so to say, is the fact that if you slap a proper captain on this thing, if you slap a proper captain on this thing, well, at least a 10-point captain that is, then you get a pretty amazing 5.4 km concealment, which is basically the best you can reach at tier 8. This means if there's no carriers and no radars around, you are brutally good at outspotting all enemy DDs. In fact, the Kagero can easily get something like an Akizuki killed, even though the Akizuki has much better firepower, simply by just outspotting him, forcing him to smoke up, and then just torping the smoke and such kind of play. Overall, though, Kagero's biggest weakness is the fact that it is ranked, and the average player is an idiot because it's World of Warships. So that means oftentimes just spotting the enemy isn't enough to kill him, because you also need your teammates to actually shoot the guy you're spotting. And that's a big problem. Actually, getting your battleship teammate to shoot the DD instead of sniping the enemy battleship that's 20 kilometers away is pretty futile and pretty aggravating. So most of the time, bringing a spotting DD is not a good idea for randoms or ranked. Same thing. You want something that can deal with the DDs himself. So Kagero, not really recommended. Asashio kind of for the same reason. Asashio also has the downside of, if the comp doesn't favor you, meaning if you're up against a bunch of DDs and cruisers, you're basically not going to accomplish anything, because you have those special torpedoes, super deep water, that can only hit carriers and battleships. So
what are you new? Did you just pick up
Milky Pony Boy 420 YOLO.
Animal research.
I don't even want to comment on your name.
:D.
I don't even want to comment on your name. Thank you for the 2 months. As I should be the same thing. Harekaze is probably going to be quite good. Harekaze is kind of like the Kagero in terms of concealment. Really good concealment. But the difference is, on Harekaze, you can slot these guns. The middle hull, that is the 410. This equips the 100mm guns of the Akizuki on this thing. Which means that no, you don't quite have the firepower of the Akizuki, but you do have the concealment of the Kagero combined with excellent maneuverability and agility. So you're a small ship with great concealment, and you got 3 Akizuki turrets. Harekaze is a pretty good jack of all trades. You can kind of deal with everything in this thing. Yeah, honestly, I think this one is going to be a pretty damn good pick. Harekaze is going to be a pretty solid pick. It doesn't really have any real weaknesses to it. Yeah, Yukikaze I don't recommend. Wasn't Yukikaze the one? Oh yeah, Yukikaze was the one with the... Yeah, it only had F3 torpedoes. You can get good concealment on this thing, sure. And you can pull off maybe some YOLOs, but very sluggish turret traverse combined with only 8 km torpedoes. It makes it insanely situational. It makes it insanely situational as a destroyer. And you don't really... Korean Escapist, thank you before. The best ships for ranked are usually ships that are pretty good at everything. Because
taking a break from WoWs but still enjoying the damn good streams.
Thank you, Korean Escapist. I'm not saying it can't work. I'm just saying that oftentimes in ranked, you want ships that are universally good at many things. Because oftentimes you have to fill in for mistakes or deficiencies that your team has. Like, your teammate doesn't understand how to use radar. You have to make up for it with spotting. Your team doesn't understand to focus someone pushing into a cap. You have to torpedo him or gun him down. Like, you oftentimes want a ship that can compensate for the potatoes on your team. And that's why if a weakness like 8 km torpedoes is pretty Don't get me wrong, they're F3 torps. They hit like a truck and they're stupid fast. But the enemy team really has to push into this to actually make them work. Mogami, I mean, if you're going to run Mogami, if you're absolutely going to run Mogami, probably best to run... Rudder shift or concealment are both options, but 155mm guns, absolutely, just for the brutal DPM. And then you spec IFHE on top, and these things get a fair bit of penetration, and then you just try to melt everything from behind cover. Mogami's DPM is still brutal. Torpedoes are more of a support tool. The average player tends to think of the torpedo as the main armament, and then they give full broadside. And giving full broadside when you have a citadel that looks like this tends to not be the best move ever. But in terms of pure firepower, Mogami is still a monster, but it's also going to be a very difficult ship to play. And with radar spotting you behind islands and potentially a lot of carriers, Mogami's absolutely pitiful AA will become a significant weakness very, very quickly. So, Mogami is... It can work, don't get me wrong, but in terms of skill level required to make it work is significantly higher. Mogami is not an easy ship to play, especially since you also rely a fair bit on your team, because once again you have no radar, no real utility yourself. Your role is hiding behind an island, hiding in a smoke and spamming HE. You can't do a whole lot of other things, and when there are other options like let's say Cleveland that kind of does the same thing but also brings a ton of AA and a radar to the team, it's very hard to recommend the Mogami in comparison. Atago has always been a solid workhorse. Atago is much more comfortable in open water gunboating than the Mogami, mostly because Atago is one of those few tier 8 cruisers that actually gets access to a heal. And with Superintendent you have access to 4 heals and you are surprisingly durable. You also got a great rudder shift on the ship, and just sitting in the back spamming HE, or well, if need be, even YOLOing in and torpedoing, because you got much better torpedo angles than the Mogami, meaning you can torpedo slightly forward as well. Atago has always been solid. Someone said I wouldn't recommend bringing cruisers that have no heal and radar. That's generally a good suggestion. Either you have to have enough health to offset potential carrier strikes, or you have to bring enough utility that even if you get carrier struck sitting at 5k health behind an island, you're still a radar threat to the enemy team. Basically you have to bring something to compensate, because just bog standard tier 8 cruisers don't bring a whole lot to a team. Atago though, always going to be a solid choice. AA is shit, always has been, but rudder shift is great, concealment is great, and the firepower, even though the reload is long, this thing, the HE hurts, and you tend to start a lot of fires. Atago, same thing. Amagi. Oh, poor Amagi. It's hard to recommend many tier 8 BBs now when they've added ships like Massachusetts. Because like when tier 8 BBs, it's honestly hard to recommend any other tier 8 BB than Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is so stupidly good. Maybe Vladivostok for sheer tankiness. After the changes, Kii is also a potential significant competition to the Amagi after they buffed it. Overall though, Amagi's gimmick has always been at close ranges you're very, very hard to citadel because you have a turtleneck. And at close range, people cannot really hit your citadel at all, so you can literally do drive-bys on other ships and blap them. The problem is, of course, you are coated in 32mm deck armor, which means everything can and will pin you when it comes to HE. This thing is pretty easy to melt. You do have hard-hitting guns though, hard-hitting main guns. The biggest issue is the turret setup, requiring you to give a lot of broadside to use them, and your lack of armor. That said, I think all battleships to some extent can work, because battleships are very, very good at punishing enemy mistakes. And that's usually what you want for ranked. As for Kii, well, Kii these days, 10km torpedoes is pretty meme worthy. Can catch people off guard. The armor, what was it they did? I think they changed the citadel armor, didn't they? So it doesn't get citadel. Oh yeah, they changed this. This used to be overmatchable. One of the great weaknesses of the Kii was, compared to the Amagi, was you could get overmatched citadels through here, but they buffed it to 32mm of plating, so the overmatched citadels doesn't happen anymore. Besides that, kind of like the Amagi, except you bring significantly more AA compared to the Amagi. You go from what, continuous damage, short range 320 to 110 long range. You go to short range 118, but then you get medium range 309 and long range 203. So the AA boost is significant, as well as bringing torpedoes to the table. So Kii is straight up just a better choice these days. It's hard to argue otherwise. It's straight up just a better choice, especially since we do expect to see a fair bit of carriers. Kii does have a chance to shine. Note though that Kii does not have Amagi's excellent torpedo belt, so eating torps in the Kii will absolutely brutalize you, which is a pretty significant downside. I think it was what, 25, and I think Amagi was 43? Yeah, 43. So prepare for that. Ignis and Ragnarok are basically Amagis, so what I just said applies. Shokaku, Kaga all monsters. Benson. Benson is a pretty damn solid workhorse. Or although it has kind of suffered from power creep. The good side of the Benson is that it's kind of good at everything. It's especially good at being a team player. Like it has American smokes, which means you can smoke up your teammate. You can smoke up your teammate and just have a radar cruiser like a Cleveland sitting in a smoke for 120 seconds farming, which can absolutely win you the match. But time has not been that kind. Okay, you don't want to run this. This is trash. You'll run torpedo tubes if you're gonna run anything. But once again, that means relying on the team, and generally that's not something you want. The torpedoes are so slow and so hard to hit. However, they do decent damage, and they do have decent range, and they're very stealthy. The problem is a lot of people will be bringing Hydro to rank for that reason. Personally, I think the Kid will be a much more solid choice, because the Kid, unlike the Benson, can also deploy that very same smoke to help out the team. But the Kid also has access to better DPM. I think it was better, what, 3 seconds versus 3.3. It might be a captain difference though, it's possible. But more importantly, Kid has access to heal. So we're talking, well, you can switch defensive on this one as well. But more important, we're talking about significantly improved AA. And we're talking about heal, which means you're better against other DDs and you're better against carriers. Both things which I expect to be quite valuable in this season of Ranked. Overall, Benson kind of has fallen off a fair bit. Baltimore is probably going to be really good. Baltimore is a monster. There's a fair bit of ships that you can actually deal with quite well, because Baltimore has 27mm plating, which means you bounce 380mm guns, which means Richelieu, Gascogne, Bismarck, Tirpitz, all of these ships, Odin, all these ships will bounce off your plating, as long as you maintain angling. So Baltimore will be fairly useful against many of the battleships. It's insanely stealthy, and it has access to 10-kilometer American radar with a pretty damn long duration as well. And if you have to fight other cruisers, there are a few cruisers that do it better than the Baltimore, because the nose-in angling plus the heavy 203mm American AP means that you dumpster them quite easily. It also brings really good AA to the table. Well, really good and really good. Saying really, when I say really good, it means like you kind of shoot down something every now and then. Tier AA has been kind of become a meme, but in comparison to many of the others, it's really good AA. So overall, Baltimore is absolutely going to be a strong choice. It's going to be good against basically everything. Cleveland, very similar. Not as good against cruisers. Cleveland is not nearly as good against cruisers, but on the other hand, if you do get the farm from behind islands, you will melt battleships significantly faster in the Cleveland. And you do have radar, and you do have AA and Hydra and so forth. So once again, a lot of consumable usage. Not similar tankiness, but a lot of firepower. So both Cleveland and Baltimore will be very solid choices. Wichita. Didn't we have tier 8 ranked earlier? Why are people asking again? I'm not sure. Is tier 8 coming back? I have no clue. But like, what's the ranked season right now? Is there one? No? What's the next season gonna be? Next season starts in 2 days. Is it gonna be tier 8? It's ranked sprint? Is it tier 8 sprint? Oh, well then it's kind of irrelevant. We had a T8 sprint and now we have a T8 regular. Ah. Well, then it should be very irrelevant. Sprint is whatever. You go through the season so fast, but a proper season we might as well go through it. The tier 6 is for clan battles. Tier 8 is for solo rank. Wichita, I love this ship. It's kind of like a combination of New Orleans. I call it Diet Baltimore, mostly because it has, even though it has 203mm guns, it does not have Baltimore's super heavy AP. It's got New Orleans shells. it means that you still absolutely blap ships, but you don't have quite the same penetration as the Balti has. In return, it does mean that you have better shell velocity though, which makes it easier to hit the shells. You also handle better than the Baltimore. We're talking 730 versus 680, and of course a crazy good rudder shift on the Wichita, and you're also stealthier. So handles better, stealthier, but in return your radar is shorter range. You actually get the 9-kilometer radar, not the 10-kilometer radar of the Baltimore. I think the Wichita will be a strong pick, but I do think the Baltimore is still the better ship. That doesn't mean it's a bad ship though. Wichita is absolutely a good ship, and I really enjoy playing it. Montpellier is kind of a more accurate Cleveland with slower reload. Everything I said regarding Cleveland applies to this one. It's a small trade-off. Which, honestly, at this point is which one do you want to run? The difference between Montpellier and Cleveland is much smaller than the difference between Wichita and Baltimore. North Carolina. Well, if you want to play an American with forward-facing turrets and 406s, you should play the Massachusetts. But if you're a poor free-to-play player, North Carolina is always a solid choice. North Carolina has always been a solid choice. It's got pretty good AA. The medium range is still pretty impressive to this day. The medium and short range AA damage. The flak is, well, you throw up a lot of flak, but more importantly, the guns are very, very accurate. It's, I think, the only ship at this tier that has 2.0 Sigma. Wasn't it 2.0 on the NC? Do I misremember? I think it was 2.0. Yeah, 2.0. I think it's the only tier 8 battleship that has 2.0. So this means the main guns are significantly more reliable. However, the AP shell velocity is brutally slow, which means that it takes a fair bit of skill to accurately land your North Carolina salvos. Also, the ship can get citadel quite easily if you get broadside. It doesn't have a whole lot of citadel armor. Friar Scooby, thank you for the 7 months.
7 months of watching the best period.
Thank you, my dude. So NC has always been a high skill, high reward kind of ship. It's not nearly as easy to play as something like a Massachusetts, but the guns can be extremely rewarding. And of course, having access to 406mm guns at tier 8 is an advantage because it means that you overmatch both 25 and 27mm of plating, which means something like a Baltimore that can easily angle against a Tirpitz or a Bismarck will get blapped straight through the nose by these guns. And you get very good concealment on North Carolina as well. With the full build, I think it was, what, 12.2 or something? Really, really stealthy ship though. Alabama, overall, this next sprint is tier 9 you potatoes. What? Okay, are you guys confusing again? The next season is tier 8, standard ranked. Okay, you know what? We can go after this video. We can go all in. We can go check it out and figure out. Right. Next sprint is tier 9, yes, but the normal ranked is tier 8. Man, this is like. Why is even the simplest thing something worth arguing about? Right, Alabama. It's, I'd say, a worse North Carolina, but on the other hand, it is a lower skill cap North Carolina as well. So you can get away with things in the Alabama that the North Carolina would punish you. And one of Alabama's features is the best torpedo belt of the tier at a pretty insane 49%. So this is a ship that you can eat a ton of torpedoes in and still come out looking quite dandy, honestly. The AA is not as strong. The gun Sigma is less accurate than North Carolina's. If I remember correctly, I think it handled just a tad better than the North Carolina as well. So it's a trade-off of more torpedo survivability and slightly better agility at the cost of concealment and gun accuracy. So as I said, it's a bit more forgiving, but it's not quite as rewarding either. Massachusetts is obviously the top tier 8 pick for honestly, for the battleship pick, it's hard to argue otherwise. Massachusetts has a lot going for it. First of all, that amazing Alabama torpedo belt that I mentioned at 49. Well, the second place goes to the Massachusetts at a pretty impressive 46. It's also got a nice health pool. It's got good concealment, good maneuverability, a good AA, and especially since you tend to build a fair bit into secondaries often on this thing, you also tend to inadvertently buff the AA while you do it. The main guns are even less accurate than Alabama's, but most of the time you're pushing in so it doesn't bother you. And Massachusetts does have the advantage of getting the fast reloading repair party, which means that, well, it ticks for 28 seconds for almost 400, but it only has a cooldown of 38 seconds in comparison to North Carolina's, which heals a bit more, but has has a cooldown that is twice as long. So that means Massachusetts survives under pressure much better than the North Carolina. And considering you do want to push in and be under pressure, because Massachusetts also has access to some of the best secondaries at the tier. The IFHE nerf kind of brutalized these because, well, back in the days, speccing IFHE on the Massachusetts gave you the amazing ability to pen 27mm plating. But IFHE was changed. Well, I can show you. Let's yoink a random captain. See, back when IFHE gave you 30% boost, it buffed this 21mm to, was it 27, 28? But after the rework, after the IFHE rework, it now looks like this, because it's no longer 30, it's 25%, and that means your secondary pen sits at 26. And only being able to pen 26 is a pretty huge downgrade, because it greatly limits your targets from basically all the heavy cruisers and the deck armor and so forth that you normally penned to much less. So IFHE has lost some value, which in return has toned down the Massachusetts a bit, but it doesn't change the fact that this secondary armament has incredibly good dispersion, much better secondary dispersion than any of the German ships, which means on the Massachusetts you don't even need to spec manual secondaries, and the secondaries are still very viable. So overall, Massa is going to be one of the top picks of the season. Super strong ship in every way. Carriers, always going to be good. Enterprise, probably going to be the best one, as always. Broken ass, busted ship. I hate how Ohio, Massachusetts, and Georgia have almost as good secondaries as the German battleships. Now they have better. I mean, Germans have the pen, but Americans have the dispersion. And the dispersion means that they don't have to put 4 points into making them useful, which is so valuable. Ognevoy, I honestly cannot think of any reason to play the Ognevoy. It's really hard for me to think of a reason to play the Ognevoy. Ognevoy has a fair bit of weaknesses. First of all, 6.1 km concealment is dreadful. It's decently fast and decently agile. The AA is an absolute meme. Don't expect it to stop anything. Having one flak is the equivalent of having one angry Jingles throw his empty whiskey bottle at the planes. It's not going to accomplish much except humor. 10 kilometer torps is decent. As a torpedo boat, the Ognevoy is okayish. For some reason, people keep thinking it's more of a hybrid or it's a gunboat, and they think they can actually gun things with this. But the awkward turret setup, one here, means that you get those wonky dispersion things where one shell goes too far left and one goes too far right. And in general, the DPM is absolutely laughably sad. So poor DPM combined with poor concealment means that there are much better ships that you could be choosing for this role than the Ognevoy. The Ognevoy doesn't really serve much of a role. It's kind of a bad hybrid. It's a torpedo gunboat bad shit hybrid thing. Don't play it. Kiev is, well, this one is going to be fairly high skill cap, because there's usually you see Kiev players that are horrendously useless. They sail around the flank and they farm one battleship for 10 minutes while everyone else dies, and then the carrier goes over and kills the Kiev. There's those kind of players. Then there's the guys that are actually really useful in it, because Kiev's DPM is pretty impressive, and if you play the Kiev to support your team, support your DDs and farm them, you can do a fair bit of damage. The problem with playing gunboat Kiev or just bringing Kiev to ranked is you rely on multiple things, which is you rely on having teammates willing to contest the caps for you, teammates willing to provide spotting for you, you can't do these roles yourself. So you end up being very, very team reliant in the Kiev. And also because your torps are only 8 kilometers, most of your damage comes from gunboating, which means you need a lot of time. If you're going to melt ships in a DD, you need to be shooting at them for a very, very long time, which once again, you need your teammates to stay alive, to survive long enough for your damage to become meaningful. So the TLDR on the Kiev is you need competent teammates. And since we are talking about World of Warships, the only thing I can tell you is good luck. Chapayev is going to be a pretty solid pick. Mostly because Chapayev has excellent range. If you spec IFHE, you can pen and you can farm ships across the map quite easily. And more importantly, because it's Soviet, of course, it has an absolutely absurd stealth radar range. Let's show. Let's spec this. What would we spec? Maybe this, something like this, and probably IFHE and so forth. But this is the base build. So you got a completely absurd 10.4 km concealment. And the reason why 10.4 km concealment is so absurd on the Chapayev is of course because your radar range, especially with the mod, is 12 kilometers, 24 seconds. So what it means is the Chapayev can sail straight towards the cap. And the second it gets spotted, it can radar, and it will guaranteed radar destroyers for the full 24-second duration. And combined with the gunpowder, which is 8-second reload, you're going to get a lot of volleys off. And your team is going to get a lot of volleys off. So Chapayev is mid to long range excellent. It's kind of shit tier if you have to get into any sort of closer fights though, because the firepower is spread out, which means you have to get broadside, the armor is very, very bad, and the citadel is significant. Very, very significant. So mid to long range, the Chapayev is a pretty damn good support cruiser, but you can't hide behind islands like a Cleveland can, because you don't have the arcs, you have flat Soviet arcs, so you're forced to do a lot of open water gunboating. Once again, I would say this is a ship that has a fairly high skill cap, because Chapayevs are a pretty favorite target for battleships. And you will see a lot of devastated Chapayevs. And also having to fight other cruisers close range in the Chapayev is quite difficult, once again, because of the significant citadel. So, mid to long range support cruiser, fairly high skill cap. Can be a good ship though, but it requires a fair bit of work to put into it. Kutuzov, honestly, Kutuzov is always a solid pick. Even with all the nerfs and even with the smoke penalty being like 7.7, it's just, what it does, the Kutuzov just does so well. You smoke up somewhere, you let your DDs, your carriers, everyone spot, and then you just farm, because your range is a completely absurd 19 kilometers on a light cruiser. So you literally park in the middle of the map in your smoke, and then you just farm anything that moves, and you rack up a stupid amount of damage. It's not as strong as it used to be, but Kutuzov has always been a solid pick. When it comes to damage farming, few does it better than the Kutuzov. It's just very, very good at it. And if someone decides to YOLO you, you do have access to torpedoes just in case. The problem is, of course, people have learned to smoke fire significantly better, and Kutuzov, unlike Smolensk, is very easy to smoke fire. Ochakov, I despise the Ochakov. I think it's trash. It lacks health pool, it lacks DPM, it lacks range. It lacks a whole lot of things. The one thing it does well is it can ambush DDs with radar, but I think there's going to be plenty of ships that can execute this better, that also provide significant other utility to the team, which means the Ochakov is honestly going to be kind of pointless. I will also suspect carriers will want to strike this thing, because this complete lack of armor and only 30k health pool means carriers just striking it for 8k can kill it in just a few strikes. So, if you get to utilize teammate smokes, yep, pretty useful, but honestly, no, there are better picks. I don't recommend Ochakov. I think it's a fairly bad premium ship. Vladivostok is a monster. Vladivostok is insanely good. Of course, there's Vladivostok, then there's Vladivostok with Kuznetsov, which is a monster above a monster. If you don't want to pick the Massachusetts, like in terms of S tier picks for the ranked season, if you don't want to pick the Massachusetts, then the Vladivostok is a pretty good option. You don't have any of those juicy fast reloading heals, and you don't have any of those secondaries or even AA that is quite as monstrous, even though the mid-range being, Jesus, it has no short range, it's all mid-range, that's pretty useful. You have none of these things, but in return you have really good concealment. You have the fast reloading Soviet damage gun, which has a cooldown of only 38 seconds, which means you're very hard to burst down. And if you have something like Kuznetsov as well, you become almost impossible to burst down. More importantly than anything, you have a completely busted armor layout. This is really your only weakness, this nose. But the nose being so huge is actually an advantage because the nose gets so easily saturated. The nose is gigantic. So everyone who shoots this thing is going to saturate this nose very, very quickly, after which you don't really take that much damage. And after that, well, if they want to kill you, they have to focus the rest of your ship, and that's where Soviet armor comes into play. 40mm thick and upper belt plating, which means pretty much all HE will shatter. And the broadside armors are quite brutal. Broadside, absolutely you can be punished, but parked nose in, the Vladivostok is painfully difficult to kill. The fact that it basically has no superstructure at all is also an advantage compared to something like a Massachusetts, where you can see, well, you can just see the difference in like the area of superstructure to farm this thing versus Vladivostok's basically non-existent superstructure. So this one is going to be absolutely, and of course the Soviet guns in close range situations, which you see a lot in ranked, these Soviet guns are brutally effective. Lenin, I would say very, very good as well. It does have the advantage of the icebreaker here in the front, and it also has really, really busted armor. It does have a different turret setup. The biggest issue really with the Lenin is that the Lenin eats funky citadels. Lenin eats funky citadels. It's got, basically when you angle roughly like this, because of the curvature, you see how the nose curves like this. You see how the nose curves like this? There's this angle where if you try to use the third turret, you can be punched through straight here. And when if you're punched through straight here, you can actually just get citadels straight in. It basically eats these weird nose in citadels. It happens sometimes. Doesn't mean it's a bad ship. I think the Lenin is a very good ship. It has all those similar tankiness traits of the Vladivostoks, but it can eat these really weird ghost citadels, and it can cost you the game with that when that happens. So it is a bit annoying. What about Tallinn? I already covered the Tallinn. Yeah, but both the Soviet battleships will be good. Absolutely will be good. Z23, shit. I mean, it's German. What else? Like, you look at the flag and you go, ha! If it's a DDN German, avoid. Honestly, that's, unless it's a T61, that's pretty much rule of thumb in World of Warships. But overall, geez, I don't know, where do you start with this thing? Concealment, maneuverability, DPM, it doesn't really have any damage. Torps, I mean, what kind of stats did we even end up? Let's see. Did you even want to use the 150s? No, I think this was actually DPM nerf. If you upgraded to the 150mm guns, I think you actually lost DPM. What kind of stealth did we get on this thing? It's been so long since I played it because I don't like playing it because it's so poor.
But I wonder.
Hamelot, thank you for the 7.
I think I'm much more humble than you would understand.
You need the 150s? No, I think that was actually
It's
DPM
not
nerf.
magic.
The 100,
It's Russian.
I think the 100.
My ass is blasted.
The 150s allows you to citadel some cruisers, which was fun, but overall, I think it was a straight up DPM nerf. Check the gun count? Yeah, I know, but even then I remember. Wasn't it this ship, or which ship was it that had a straight up DPM nerf if you loaded the 150s? Shit. I wish we had our resident Veraboo here. Was it the Ernst Gaeta? It might have been the Gaeta then. It might have been the Gaeta. That's possible actually. Oh, 150s are an HE DPM buff but an AP DPM nerf. Okay, well then it's worth running it because HE DPM is what you kind of heavily rely on. Nihilov, thank you for the 19. 9.5 Cantorps, not exactly optimal, especially 6.2 concealment, 680 meter turning circle, 37 knots. I can already see all the issues with having to fight other gunboats. The health pool is great. The health pool is huge. The AA is, oh Jesus Christ, the AA is bad. The Hydra was only 5, right? Yeah, only 5. Yeah, no, Z23 is not recommended. It's a big, clumsy, large target. Don't get me wrong, you might catch people off guard by pushing in with Hydro. But even if you catch them off guard, the gunpowder that you bring to the table is going to be very skeptical at best. And if you get focused, this thing is huge. I think that's something people don't often pay attention to on this thing, is that the ship is huge. The kit is pretty big as well. But I think though this thing just eats so much damage. I think it's the length of the ship. But Z23 is... It has some... Now don't get me wrong, it does have some gimmicks. Namely the fact that you have cruiser guns on it. And having cruiser guns on a DD can catch potatoes off guard. Because oftentimes you see these squishy cruisers sail full broadside in front of you. And when that happens, you can absolutely citadel them. And those citadels hurt. We're talking 3.7k a pop with potential 5 of them each. So you can do a lot of damage. But ultimately, if you want to play a Hydra DD, there are much better choices than a Z23. And not really recommended. Hipper, hard to recommend it when the Tallinn exists. The Tallinn brings better AP, better HE DPM, better AA, and stealth radar to the table. So, really hard to recommend. Just really hard to recommend. Just play the Tallinn instead if you want to play a Hipper style ship. Eugen does have a heal, but it pays for it so heavily. 13-second main battery reload compared to Hipper's is at 11.5, so you trade 1.5 second reload to get that heal. If you can find situations where you can YOLO in, Eugen's heal does allow it to pull off some things, because you do have German Hydro, and you do have a lot of torps, and you do have fairly good citadel protection. So as a YOLO torper, the Eugen is good, but I can't really recommend it as a ship. I can't really recommend it. What about mines? I already covered it. Okay, guys, if you don't see a ship being covered here, it's probably because I already covered it. So, yeah. There's a vote for a reason. Tirpitz. I mean, Tirpitz is always going to be an interesting choice. It's one of the few ships that can straight up charge into Massachusetts and bully the Massachusetts. It's one of the few ships that can get away with that. In general, the Tirpitz is really good against other battleships. Mostly because of its access to torpedoes, which means that any brawls have an additional threat of Tirpitz torpedoes. That doesn't... The mid to long range is, of course, very questionable on the ship, but as a close range brawler, the Tirpitz is still very, very powerful. I mean, as a 1 versus 1 ship, there are few ships that are actually better than the Tirpitz, especially against battleships. It's absolutely S tier when it comes to 1 versus 1s. That doesn't mean, though, that it can't get absolutely farmed to death. It has great deck armor at 50 millimeters. The problem is you see just how much superstructure. Like, in order to hit the deck armor, you actually have to get unlucky. Most of the time you're just going to be farming this huge superstructure. And even a nose in Tirpitz can absolutely eat a ton of AP damage just by shooting for the superstructure. It's so huge that it actually arms your AP shells. So you can get full arm pens on a Tirpitz pushing in. That doesn't mean it's an easy ship to kill, and when this thing just charges at you, you better hope that there's some people around to help you. Its biggest issues are it doesn't handle that well, and of course the turret setup and the guns are extremely unreliable. But if you do get the brawl in a Tirpitz, it's still a great pick. Bismarck. Kind of like the Tirpitz, except instead of being really good against BBs, I would say the Bismarck is kind of more balanced. It actually has, I think the Bismarck actually had better AA. Is this not, yeah, this was an upgraded hull. I think the Bismarck actually had significantly better AA than the Tirpitz. Yeah, significantly better. We go from continuous 186, 39, 172 to 287, 179, 161. So significantly better AA on the Tirpitz. Or Bismarck, the issue is of course the lack of range. Overall though, Bismarck of course gets access to hydro instead of torpedoes, which means it's much more comfortable to push in against the DDs and torpedo cruisers and such compared to the Tirpitz. Both ships are, well, they're still pretty strong at their tiers. They are still pretty strong at their tiers. In general, there are few actually really poor BBs. The smaller the map, the less combatants, the stronger these secondary focused brawling battleships become. That's just the way it works. And that's why Odin, for example, which in randoms might be a bit questionable because of the health pool. Well, a fair bit questionable maybe. I think the Odin will actually do quite well in ranked. Mostly because you want to punish mistakes. And people are going to do a fair bit of mistakes. And Odin has both hydro and torpedoes, which means that it has a fair bit of flexibility. It's decent against DDs, it's decent against BBs. The problem is, of course, if you face any good players that angle against its main guns, you're going to struggle, but in small-scale engagements, the Odin's health pool will not melt nearly as quickly as in a random battle. So I think the Odin can actually do quite well in ranked. As long as you don't throw away too much health early on, which of course will limit your utility. The Duke, thank you for the 5. Tirpitz, same thing. Parseval, Zeppelin, carriers. Lightning. Potentially one of the best picks. Nah, Cossack exists. Lightning is, unlike you don't have AA to defend against carriers, but in return you have short burst smokes, which is honestly a better defense. Just avoid them. You do have access to hydro, so you're unlikely to hit any torps. You have a great turret setup, good gunpowder, good torps, fantastic concealment, one of the best gunboat concealments. This Lightning is just going to be a top tier pick. 8 km torps, but you can launch single target. It's insanely agile as well. Lightning's biggest downside will be the lack of speed. Besides that, Lightning does everything really, really well. Cossack is probably going to be one of the top picks. Cossack is insanely good. It's been a recommended ship for as long as I can remember. Oh, this is an IFHE captain. Whoops. Whatever. I just wanted the concealment. It has the same brutal concealment. It doesn't quite have the same tight turning circle, but it does have 10 km torps. But more importantly, Cossack's damage is brutal. Absolutely brutal. 4.5 second reload on these 8 guns, and you can just hunt down enemy ships, especially enemy DDs, engage them with hydro, fast smoke, speed boost. It's very, very good at winning objective control. Cossack is a great ship. Cossack is a great ship. It's very, very rough to fight, because trying to play something like a Kagero, you have the same concealment, but this thing has much, much better firepower. Called Lightning and his weakness is speed. Insert ironic Palpatine meme. But I think Cossack is going to be very good. Edinburgh might be decent. Depends on how many carriers. If there's not enough carriers and you can get away with playing radar Cossack, it's actually kind of filthy. Because let me show you guys 1 second. Oh, oops, don't have these mounted. Oh, radar Cossacks, radar Edinburgh. Oh, my bad. Radar Cossack is called Smoland. Alright, so you end up in this situation where you have 10 km radar, 30-second duration, and a pretty brutal 9.2 km concealment. So that's an 800-meter stealth radar buffer, and it's kind of busted at times. Of course, carriers will greatly impact the utility here, but there's a lot of stealth radars. There's going to be Tallinn, there's going to be Chapayev, and there's going to be Edinburgh that can all stealth radar DDs. So pretty damn dangerous potentially. In terms of firepower, it's quite good. It's got torpedoes, and of course, unlike most cruisers, you do have access to a lot of heals with this thing as well. So Edinburgh is probably going to be a pretty solid cruiser choice. It brings a fair bit of utility to the game. Baltic can also stealth. Oh yeah, Baltic can stealth radar. You're right. Baltic's stealth radar gap is smaller, but it can still do it. So Edinburgh is probably going to be good. Albemarle. Oh my god. Yeah. Okay, let me get something to drink. Albemarle. Albemarle. Well. Albemarle comes with a lot of useful features, like if the enemy team is having issues finding the citadel, the Albemarle has conveniently painted it on its armor scheme, so you can easily make out exactly where the citadel is, so there's no confusion of what part you have to hit in order to citadel in. Albemarle, oh man, I don't really know what to say about this ship. It's DPM is shit. DPM is shit. It's occasionally stealthy, but it's got a citadel that is literally the size of a small house. I think the radar it had was only 5. Yeah, it was 5. Okay, it's 5. It's not that bad. It's a really good target to shoot at, because you can conveniently overmatch all this, and then you got this nice little edge here. You see this edge? To make sure that any AP that overmatches is either caught here or here. So you hit citadels nose in, you hit citadels from the stern, you most certainly hit citadels from the broadside. I really can't think of an angle where you don't hit citadels in this thing. In fact, it's very convenient for catching citadels. It's not a recommended ship. If you want to bring some sort of agile HE spammer with a heal, bring the Atago, preferably. Don't bring this one. Yeah, I think it can. Oh yeah, I've got. You see how the booty is angled to catch shells, to make sure that any shells coming in from here will guaranteed be caught with a full penetration. Like this thing just eats damage from everywhere to a brutal extent. No, I do not recommend Albemarle. I most certainly do not recommend Albemarle. Cheshire, same thing. Also convenient. Huge citadel. This comes with even less DPM than the Albemarle, which is impressive to say the least. Also not recommended. Cheshire has big tits in Azure Lane. That's like the brightest side this ship has. Anything else is kind of not. Monarch. I mean, the only reason I could see you would bring a Monarch to tier 8 ranked is because you're grinding the line and you literally don't have any other ship to bring. Monarch is a bit of unique in the sense that it has really poor AP, like most British battleships, with exception like Thunder. And I mean, Conquer AP is okayish, but dispersion wise. But it's also a bit unique that it actually has worse HE Alpha and fire chance than the King George and the Lion. In fact, if you look at that 6.3k alpha, 36% fire chance, and then if you go back and we look at the KGV, you can see that the smaller caliber guns, 356s, well, these things have 6.1k alpha, but 41% fire chance. So you actually lose, even though your caliber goes up and your HE alpha goes up, you actually lose like 5% fire chance going to the Monarch. So it's not really a good, not really nearly as good as an HE spammer either. And the King George has a 25-second reload, whereas, wait, Monarch, was it 25? I think it was 25. Yeah, it's 25-second reload. which is actually the same as the Monarchs. Did they buff the Monarch at some point? Why do I remember this reload being worse? Huh, must be remembering wrong. I remember the reload being worse. Regardless, the HE damage you can put out is pretty okay. The AP, of course, you will struggle to overmatch some targets, and the AP in general is quite unreliable. The Monarch, like all these Brits before it, also has an absolutely gigantic citadel. As you can see, it is a huge citadel. It doesn't quite stick up out of the water as much as something like Lion does, but it is huge and it is wide. This of course means that AP bombers, this thing is designed to catch as much damage from above and as much damage from the side as possible. The firing arcs on the back turret is also dreadful, which means that if you want to use the back turret, you basically have to give full broadside. The concealment is good. I mean, the HE Alpha is good, but overall, I don't know why you would bring this ship. Honestly, like, what's wrong with you? Don't bring this one. Just don't. Do your teammates a favor, man. Do your teammates a solid one and don't bring this ship. Why are there so many tier 8 ships? Jesus Christ! I thought this was gonna be a short go through of the ships, but they like never end. There's so many tier 8 ships. Holy shit. Vanguard? Okay, I take it back. The Monarch is not the worst battleship you could bring. The Vanguard would probably be worse, in fact. Like, so I guess the Vanguard does have... Yeah, don't play Vanguard. Like, seriously, don't. Even worse, HE fire chance. It's got better dispersion, but it pays for it by having an even larger citadel. You didn't think it was possible, did you? But there you go, an even larger citadel. And in order to use all your guns, you have to give a ton of broadside, which means you get citadeled in this thing. Vanguard is... I think these were the guns that were on Warspite. Let's see, 38142, T8142. Let me just real fast check. Was those the guns on the Warspite? Yeah, okay, 38142 MK1. Yeah, it's literally the Warspite guns. So guns that are quite nice at tier 6, you're stuck with them at tier 8. If I really need to explain more why you don't want to play the Vanguard in ranked, I don't know, watch my YouTube more, you'll figure it out. But overall, not recommended to bring that ship at all. Royal Navy carriers. If you don't have access to the other carriers, then you can play these. That's really the only reason. Fantask. I remember there was a bit of trade-off with the Fantask. What was the trade-off? I think it had worse reload. Worse reload than the Terrible. But I think it had better torpedoes. Terrible, though, is actually the ship I like more of these. Because even though it has slower torps, it has better main better reload. Overall, I think if you want to play a gunboat DD, I think Terrible would be a better choice than the Kiev. Although carriers will of course always be an issue, but the 6.6 game concealment combined with the firepower this thing can put out is actually pretty disgusting. And because it's French AP, you also got pretty damn good penetration on them. Overall though, Fantasque Terrible suffers from the same issue that the Kiev, that means that you will need teammates that do a lot of things for you. You will need teammates to contest caps, you will need teammates to do a fair bit of enemy DD spotting and so forth. Because if, let's say, you end up in a game, the enemy has one DD, let's say a kid, and you're Terrible, and there's a carrier in the game, well, the kid will go from cap to cap to cap and cap them all while smoking up, and the second you enter a cap, rocket planes will blast you to oblivion. So, once again, it makes you situational, and that's something you rarely want to be. Charles Martel. Solid HE spamming cruiser, surprisingly good AP pen. French AP is actually quite good. Let's slot this. You got main battery reload, the great speed boost, the 20% speed boost, which means on French ships, which is quite brutal. This thing is fast, agile. It doesn't have a heal though, which can be a significant weakness, but Charles Martel has never really been a Porsche. Charles Martel has always been a pretty damn solid choice, and I see it being a pretty solid choice now as well. Biggest issue with playing French, playing any HE spamming cruiser or any HE spamming ship in general. Rocket planes break rudder every time they hit. Oh, but that's on all French cruisers. You spec last stand on French cruisers until you get the Henry. That's common knowledge. You, like any French cruiser, you spec last stand until you get Henry. That thing has an armored rudder. Everyone else just loses it all the time. So that shouldn't really be any reason. Overall though, Charles Martel, the biggest issue with all HE spammers is of course that you need your team to stay alive for long enough for your damage to matter. And yeah, that's really the biggest issue. And you're not going to have too much early game impact. You need time to get on a flank or in a position where you can open water gunboat and farm enemy ships to death slowly, steadily. And that's what you need. You need time. So that's why it's probably not, it's going to be a bit debatable. Because I've seen ranked games, well, I played my fair bit of ranked games, and it usually starts with all DDs rushing caps, and then everyone piles in as much damage as possible to kill the enemy DDs, and whoever lost their DDs is basically guaranteed to lose the game, the end. So, Charles Martel's effectiveness, questionable. Bayard, high skill cap, potentially very effective ship, insanely stealthy, which means that you can sneak up and ambush. Like, being ambushed by Bayard is brutal. Like, you sneak up behind your DDs, they spot the enemy DD, and then you come charging in with your speed boost. You come charging in with your speed boost, gun doing well over 40 knots, guns ablazing with your reload booster, and you basically instantly blap the enemy DD. It can be brutal, but on the other hand, your armor is also shit, and your citadel is huge, so high skill cap, difficult to play ship. Potentially very effective though. Richelieu, not sure why you'd play this thing. In general, Richelieu win rate is pretty okay, because Richelieu's turret setup forces people to go nose in, which actually helps a lot of potatoes. Because they normally, when they play other ships, they want to use all guns, so they go broadside. So Richelieu kind of naturally has a very low skill cap. You don't have to be particularly good at the game to do fine in this ship. Or the biggest issue though is it has literally no armor. Like, it's 32 millimeters all over the place. The turtleback on the side can be punched through. It's not a German turtleback, so you can punch through a citadel at. The gun dispersion is dreadful, and the guns are 380 millimeters, which means they can be angled against by heavy cruisers. So, Gas can loses that convenient good turret setup. In return, it gets a fast reloading heal. Not really a recommended ship either. 380 millimeter guns once again. Low skill floor. I guess. I mean, it's an fairly easy ship to do decent in. Gascan is a bit harder because you have to give a fair bit of broadside to use the guns, but I hard time recommending this one either. Same weakness of armor, same weakness of gunpowder. Xian Yang, no. Seriously, no. Just, if you're gonna play something, play Benson. If you can't play Benson, don't play Xian Yang. Just don't play. It's not that bad, but it's gotten kind of power crept, and the fact that you can't DD, you can't torp DDs in smoke means that, I guess you could do memes. Radar DD. The problem is Xian Yang's gunpowder isn't exactly going to win any prizes. So the biggest issue with running radar Xian Yang is that there's a chance that you radar someone and pick a fight, and then he just dumpsters you. That's really the problem. Like, he radars you and then he's like, okay, I'll take this fight, and then you get dumpstered because your firepower is so anemic. So radar Xian Yang can work if you have teammates willing to shoot the radar target. But overall, I have a hard time recommending it. Like, you radar a Cossack, and the Cossack just literally takes a big steaming pile on you. Siliwange is probably going to be pretty effective. Surprisingly, Siliwange I think has a fair bit of things going for it. Most importantly, it's got a 5.9 km concealment, which might not sound that impressive, but it's got 5.9 km concealment combined with a 5.5 km hydro. Now, this is pretty important because pretty much every single hydro DD at this tier, even the German ones, has a 5 km hydro. This thing has a 5.5. So this means that a lot of ships that like to park in a smoke and sit there with their hydroactive, Germans, Loyangs and such, well, you can crawl up on them with this 5.5 km hydro and you can outspot them, which is pretty damn effective. It also has pretty fast reloading smokes, 70-second reload time 95, they last 70, so the gap is actually pretty small in between. Casually power creeping Germans, yes, of course. And of course, unlike many of the others, the torps are pretty nasty. They are 65 knots, the 10 km range. The torp reload is brutal, it's almost 2 minutes, but the torp alpha is also very, very high at 18 kilometers. So these deep water torps can easily blap just about any target, and these ones hit cruisers as well, unlike Asashio, since they're just normal deep waters. Biggest issue really with this ship is that in a straight up gunfight in the open, it gets completely wrecked. It just gets completely wrecked in a straight up gunfight because 4.5 second reload on this fairly pitiful gun power. But you don't really want to be taking straight up fights, and you got a lot of health at 20k as well. So overall, I think Siliwange is going to be quite effective. Did I say 18k? I said 18k. Oh, whatever. 18k alpha. Chat, I've been talking for a long time. Shut up. Overall, I think Siliwange is going to be pretty effective. Going to be a pretty strong ship. The AA is, of course, complete trash tier, but that's why you have your smokes. So, yeah. Probably going to be a pretty good ship. Probably going to catch a lot of people off guard with that really long-range Hydra. Loyang. Also, Loyang is always good. Every year Loyang is good. Every season Loyang is good. For some reason, there are still DD players that don't understand that DDs can have Hydro. So this 5.5k Hydro can creep up. Oh, this thing had 5.5 as well. Oh, it was only the Germans that had 5. Oh, I forgot. Wow, my bad. I thought that even the Loyang only had 5. Ah, okay, never mind. It's just the Germans. But yeah, Loyang is always going to be good. I think I'm running the short range torps. Depends on which one you want. I like the short range because once you get rid of the DDs, you can these things are really effective against other ships because they hit so damn hard and they're so fast and so forth. But Loyang has always been a solid pick, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be a solid pick this season as well. Irian, no, honestly no. Irian relies so heavily on the enemy being retarded, and just no, really, it's got deep water torpedoes and all this, but in order for the Irian to shine, the enemy team has to be pushing up very aggressively into it, and by the time the enemy team is pushing very aggressively, the game is either already won or lost. It's a Kutuzov that trades range and effectiveness for a fairly useless gimmick. No, just no. It's a decent long range gunboat, but there are so many better cruiser choices. Would not recommend. By far the absolute worst tier 8 cruiser in the game. By far. There is no other tier 8 cruiser. Even the Ochakov is more useful than the Wukong. The Wukong is such a massive dumpster fire, it's hard to imagine anyone could actually come up with such a combination. They buffed it. They still didn't, like, again, Wukong is based on the Charles Martel, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a pretty good, decent long-range, mid to long-range HE spammer. So you're thinking, well, maybe they can do some cool modification. Maybe they can do something interesting with the Wukong. So something interesting they did. Of course, the main gimmick was the French guns, which were pretty good. They had main battery reload booster. So Wargaming got the bright idea that instead of having a main battery reload booster, they are going to implement a torpedo reload booster. And the ship has a total of 6 torpedoes, 2x3, that are deep water. So instead of having a main battery reload booster, which is useful against every single target, now instead, if you pop that consumable, you can launch another 6 deep water 12-kilometer range torpedoes, which is hardly surprisingly not very useful. So that's a huge that's a huge downgrade, especially since these torps are kind of embedded. So the torp angles aren't even that good. It's kind of hard to actually get them all off. You have to sail like an idiot back and forth like this just to get them off, during which time you can't obviously shoot, because if you shoot and then try to torp, you just get citadeled. So you actually tend to nerf your DPM when you're actually trying to launch these things. So then you're thinking, well, okay, that's a pretty bad downgrade, but that's not like the end of it. They didn't actually end it there. They also decided that instead of Charles Martel's extremely effective 20 km, 20% speed boost, well, they're just gonna remove it. So, and give it, I think, spotter plane? Was that the trade-off? I think that was the trade-off. It was something completely absurd. So, 20% speed boost, whatever. So now you do 34 knots. And you can't switch any consumables, you can't slot Hydro either. It's hard to imagine a Charles Martel being this butchered, but this thing is really that butchered. It's terrible. Wukong is by far the worst tier 8 cruiser you could imagine. You can have good range in it, yes. You can sit at really far range with your spotter plane, and you can shoot HE, which of course synergizes extremely well with a ship that only has 12 km torpedoes, so he has to go close, launch torpedoes, and then sail away to get advantage of the spotter plane, and then sail close again to use the torpedoes. Let's just say that whoever came up with this design probably doesn't play World of Warships, because it's not very... it doesn't have very good synergy. Right. Amalfi... probably always going to be a pretty solid pick. Amalfi's got nice health pool, nice maneuverability on it, pretty decent concealment as well. If you got Sansonetti for the expert loader, and more importantly, SAP is always effective, because there's always going to be some DD spotted early on, and Amalfi's ability to punish that DD is always going to be effective. So Amalfi is probably going to be a pretty solid choice, and it does have smoke as a free get out of jail card. It might not have a heal, but it does have a smoke, which kind of serves the same purpose of giving it extra survivability. So Amalfi might be okay. The AA is incredibly shit, mostly because of the lack of range, but hey, no one has AA, because that's the way wargaming intended. Just don't get caught in an Amalfi. Yeah, but that kind of applies to most cruisers. It kind of applies to most cruisers. Roma, probably going to be a pretty okay choice. Roma's advantage has always been the armor is god tier. The armor is real. It used to be god tier, then Soviets came, but in general, armor is really, really good, and the concealment is really absurd for a battleship. Carriers will kind of dumpster this thing, and if you get broadside, you will get dumpstered as well. But and the guns are trolley, but have insane penetration. Overall, I don't see the Roma being that bad of a choice though. Roma has always been a surprisingly solid, fun ship. The biggest issue is just going to be carriers, because not just do the carriers punish this thing, but more importantly, they mess with the spotting, which is one of your great advantages. Still, and of course it comes with the best camo in the game, which is the beer can Roma camo, which is by far the single most superior camo in the game. No one else comes even close. 381mm guns, sorry, whatever, doesn't matter. In World of Warships it has no impact if it's 380 or 381. And what else? Ireland. Ireland. Man, no smoke. Doesn't have any DPM. Oh, it's got pretty decent DPM, but no smoke though. I guess Ireland might be okay. The biggest issue with the Ireland is, unlike the higher tiers, is that Ireland's AA isn't really that impressive yet. It hasn't gotten to the point where the AA gets really, really impressive. It's pretty questionable at best. The Torps are 2x3s. They're pretty trash tier. There are much better DD choices than the Ireland. I don't think... I mean, it's good against... It's got 100% accuracy flak, of course. So I like most DDs. If carriers sail right into the flak, sure, it can be effective. But if they dodge even the slightest, you're gonna struggle. No, I don't think Aelan will be that good of a choice.
But I wonder.
I think I am actually.
Rexes,
I think I'm
thank you for
much
the
more
5.
humble than you would understand.
And finally, Orkan. I mean, if you do, Orkan might actually be pretty okay. Orkan might be pretty nice. The gimmick of Orkan is, of course, speed boost, heal, radar. Yeah, Orkan might actually be quite effective. Let's see, let's slap a captain on this thing. Thank you, Rexus, for the 5. Orkan is like, if I remember, it's like a lightning, except with radar. 18.5k health, 4.5 second reload, only 12k torps, but sorry, 80 knots. Oh, this. Oh yeah, these were actually surprisingly effective because of the speed. Really good agility. Speed is trash, but concealment 5.9. Speed boost is 8. Heal is decent. It's 2k health. Oh, and a 7.5k and 24 second radar. Yeah, I think Orkan is going to be pretty effective. I think Orkan is going to be pretty good in ranked, because there's going to be a lot of smoke ships, no doubt. Yeah, I could see Orkan being quite effective. It's lightning without smokes, but instead it has radar and heal. That's not necessarily a bad trade-off. I think Orkan can be pretty effective. I played it a fair bit. I got a lot of XP on it. Huh, do I do decent? How do I do in it? I don't remember. It's been a while since I played it. Yeah, that's gonna be the end of those of our ranked checkup. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This ended up being a lot longer than I intended it to be.